Hello, my name is Spec and welcome to my March and April wrap-up. I didn't read enough books in March to quantify filming a wrap-up for just that month, so that is why I'm combining these two together. I've been in a very big reading slump that has kind of been looming over my head, so I didn't read a lot during March, but if I combine it with April, it seems like a fairly normal amount of like 6 or 7 books. So without further ado, let's jump into it. The first book that I read was a novella and it was by Sylvain Neuvel. I read it for a reading vlog and I also read one of my other books in that vlog as well, so I'll link that in case you're interested in more of my fresh thoughts. But the book is a history of what comes next, and I've read from this author before and quite enjoyed his work, so I thought I'd enjoyed this one, but that really wasn't the case. I was actually very underwhelmed and detached from this story, and it follows a girl and you see her learning from her mother. It's just her and her mother. They travel around quite a lot. It is a historical sci-fi, so it's set during the time of the space race, but the girl and the mother that we follow don't seem to be human. They are potentially aliens, but it's not quite clear, and it is their goal and their generations of women's goal to get humanity off Earth and send them to the stars, and they are wanting to do that to save the human race. So you don't know why they have this motivator. They don't even know why they have this motivator. They're also on the run from their counterpart, I guess. They're like evil counterpart that manifests only in men. So we've got these women and these men in this narrative, and there are historical things, like I said, that are linked to the space race. And these characters do things in the narrative, and this is mostly what I had a problem with. But if they weren't there, they would have happened anyway, these historical things. So as far as their involvement is concerned, it didn't really make the plot that enticing to me. And when it came to the characterization, it just felt very tense, actiony, and kind of cookie cutter. And while there were great nubs of conversation that could be had in here, especially linked to minorities and racism, it just didn't do it quite in the way that I was hoping it would, and I didn't really care about the characters involved. I was fairly interested in the action scenes, but when there's an action scene, I like to have a considerable stake in knowing the character, understanding them and caring about them, and that wasn't really the case here. So while the action scenes were enjoyable and I could imagine them and it was very clear, I wasn't very emotionally invested. I didn't have a lot of emotional stakes, and so unfortunately this one only got a 2 or 2.5 stars from me. I can't remember if I gave it 2.5 or not. If I have given it 2.5, I'll probably lower it to a 2, just because after thinking about it for a while, it really just didn't do it for me. So that was a really unfortunate read when it came into me potentially standing on the cusp of a reading slump. I think that helped escalate me into a reading slump. So that was quite unfortunate and quite underwhelming, because I really wanted to like Sylvain Neuvel's new release, but it just didn't happen. And then after that, I ended up reading Perfect on Paper by Sophie Gonzalez. And this kind of picked me up a little bit. It didn't pull me quite enough out of my reading slump, but it helped lift my head a little bit. And so this is by an Australian author. She's written another book before called Only Mostly Devastated, and I loved that book. I loved it. It made my favorites list of one of the previous years, and that's why I was super anticipating this, even though it's contemporary and I mostly read like science fiction, fantasy. So when I picked this up, I was expecting to enjoy myself, and I absolutely did. This is about a bisexual girl named Darcy Phillips. She's in high school and her mum is a teacher at this school, and that means that she has after school access, which comes in handy considering that she's the anonymous person behind Locker 89. So everybody at the school submits questions about relationships to Locker 89, and they submit an email address to their question as well. And Darcy goes in after school hours, collects all of their letters from Locker 89, and then answers them in email returns. And because they don't know who she is, she keeps all of this advice anonymous, and if it gets out that she's behind this, then potentially bad things could arise from her past actions, because she was a little bit more self-motivated when it came to love advice for one of her friends. Her friend Brooke, she is head over heels in love with, has a huge crush on, and she pushed Brooke down an avenue that she probably shouldn't have. So while we've got Darcy in love with her best friend, trying to navigate all of Locker 89's letters and keep that a secret from literally everybody, she is collecting the letters one night after school, and this guy catches her doing it because he's staying late there for swim practice. And so he effectively blackmails her, and he says, I want to get back with my ex-girlfriend, you're going to help me. And so it follows these two characters as they kind of dislike each other and learn to grow a respect for each other, and I like their rapport with each other, and I like that relationship development in here as well. But some of the, I don't know what it was, something about Only Mostly Devastated made me head over heels love it. But in this one, I couldn't love it as much, even though I did give it a 4.5 stars. So I really enjoyed this one as well, but I didn't love it as much as her other book. And I liked the way that in Sophie Gonzalez's books so far, at least from what my experience has been, that when I've been reading about her friendships and her characters in here, they don't do things for the sake of smoothing over the plot. They very much communicate with each other, and there are negative consequences to things as well that they have to navigate through. And I like that it's not just a band-aid on a broken leg situation, like, oh, they were all happy again, the end, it was marvelous. It's not like that all the time. Not to say that this had a negative ending at all, but there were situations in here where negative endings to those small scenarios could arise, and I like that they went down that avenue because that brought more tension to resolve in the plot, and it gave the characters a little bit more intensity and a more dynamic aspect, which I liked quite a lot. And it also painted everybody as having flaws, which is something that I like having and experiencing when reading a book, because nobody is perfect. So that is another one that I really enjoyed, and thankfully it started to pull me out of this slump. It didn't quite do it though, and I think the audiobook that I listened to contributed to kind of like pushing my head down and keeping me in that slump, unfortunately. This one was good though. So the audiobook that I'm referring to is Jade City by Fonda Lee, and I don't want to say that this is a bad book, because it's not. It is just a book that is very politically charged, and it took a lot of momentum to get going, and then when it did get going, my rating bumped up to a 4 because it was like, holy crap, this scene is amazing, these action sequences are amazing, the family dynamics are so good, and then it would sink back down into the politics again and I wouldn't care as much. So this is a fantasy story. It's kind of urban fantasy, but fantasy because we're in an imagined world, but they also have access to technology like cars and televisions and phones and stuff. But as well as that, Jade is their currency, and so it is very gang focused. So we follow the main gang in this city, and they are one family. So we follow 3 or 4 siblings from this family. One of them is Shay. She is, I think, the middle sibling, and she has moved away from the city and then come back. So she has relinquished all her jade and she no longer has access to it anymore, but she's still part of this powerful family. So there's a dynamic of she's left but now she's back. There is Hilo, who is the younger brother. He's quite powerful. He's called the Fist. And there's also the Pillar, which is the higher ranking person, and that is Lon, the older brother. So Lon manages all of the communications and the potential cusp of a war occurring with a warring rival gang, because they want all the jade that this family has access to, because when certain people can wield jade, it gives them supernatural abilities in terms of like speed and strength and kind of sensory, so knowing where everything is and being able to react in a very specific way. And that's very much outlined at the beginning with these 2 jade thieves, which I found incredible. It was very cinematic. But when it got further into the story, with Hilo being that more explosive, fiery one, Lon being the calmer, collective one but had struggles underneath the surface, and then Shay being removed from all this politics and having to relearn everything and kind of being a new lens back to all of this, as well as they had a cousin who was also at the Greenbone Academy, so he was learning how to use jade and how to wield it. So you got different dynamics, which I really liked, but again, the politics just got under my feet a little bit and tripped me up because it was so detailed and complicated, which usually I would love, but there was just, I don't know what it was about it. It was like it was a little bit flat and I wanted a little bit more flair, and that is definitely on me as like a personal aspect rather than anything the book necessarily did. The pace felt really slow. I think that's what it was. Even though the plot was interesting at particular beats, it didn't hold my attention all the way through. So I did like it, but I didn't love it, and I'm going to give it a 3 stars. So this is a very hyped up book, but I could only give it a 3. At this point, I don't know if I'm going to continue, but it's not one that I'm absolutely going to be like, I hated this, I'm never touching it again. It's more of a, I'm more interested in other series right now, and it's definitely not a priority, so I don't see myself picking it up in the future, but I could. So it was a 3 stars, it was okay, and if you want to read something that's Asian-inspired fantasy with jade and cool magic, and Fonda Lee's a black belt, so all of the fight scenes in here were very visual and cinematic and brutal, and I loved them, but that wasn't enough to carry the book for me. So it was only on a 3 for me. And that concludes the few books at the beginning, because I filmed this video already and then I lost the first half of it because all of the data corrupted, but I managed to savor the last section. So now we are going into past Spec and an outfit change, and I will talk about the rest of the books in this wrap up. So without further ado, I'm switching now. I also listened to some Dresden Files audiobooks in the past 2 months. The first one is Turncoat. This is the 11th book in the Dresden Files series, and this follows Harry Dresden, wizard detective consultant, works in tandem with the police, solves supernatural murders. Also, it's gotten to the point now where we're seeing a lot more recurring characters, and sure enough, in this one, somebody appears at Dresden's doorstep who Dresden doesn't really like, but this person is like, I'm being framed for murder and I need your help. And Dresden usually would turn this person away, but given what has happened in the past to Dresden himself, he's like, okay, I'll help you, but I'm doing it grudgingly. I'm not doing it in a happy way. So I like that this coalesced a lot of the different supernatural and magical storylines that we've seen so far. Not that the other books haven't, but I just love the way that the world building combines itself. I adore that stuff. And the characterization again in this one was brilliant. It made me emotional at the end. I was whooping and cheering and stuff when things happened in here, and I loved the more subtle build up and the ripple effects of the themes in here, especially with family and with I can't say spoilers, so go and check out my other videos for the Dresden Files. I'll link them down below. I do a spoiler-free section at the start, spoilers at the end, and I want to talk about all things spoilers, but I can't because if you want to start the Dresden Files, I really implore you to. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I didn't think this could be topped. However, then I read Changes and this book blew my mind, and it is now one of my favorite books, not just of the Dresden Files, but of all time. I again can't say what a synopsis of this one is because it involves a lot of characters we've met before, and so the most vague thing that I could tell you is if you read the synopsis of this, you'll get a massive spoiler for the entire series, so don't do that, just listen to what I'm saying now, or go and check out my Changes review because that has a spoiler-free section at the beginning. So, this follows Dresden, obviously. He encountered vampires in the past books, and now a big head honcho vampire is not very happy with him and has taken somebody that Dresden cares about, so now Dresden has to cross lines to get this person back. And that is essentially the bare bones of what this follows, but it just amalgamated so many characters, so much lore, so much world building that we've experienced in the past, and I honestly just could not stop thinking about this book even when I wasn't reading it. I listened to the audiobook in an entire day, and this has collectively taken all of my demotivation about reading and thrown it out the nearest window, because this has really sparked the fire in me to continue reading not just Dresden but in general. So it's kicked my reading slump very effectively, and I'm very grateful for that. I obviously gave this 5 out of 5 stars as well. Like I said, I adored it. It blew my mind. I loved it so much, and I can't wait to keep going. I have read the next book after this, and I literally finished it this morning, so I'll talk about it in a minute. But this was amazing, and if you haven't read the Dresden Files yet, you should just start so you can get to book 12 because oh my god, it was incredible. And then after those audiobooks, I picked up Way of the Argosy, which is the book that predates the Spellslinger books, but it was published after. So this is Spellslinger book 0.5, and it follows Faru Parfax. So we meet Faru when she's a lot older in the Spellslinger series. By a lot older, I mean she's like in her 20s, maybe her early 30s, I'm not sure. But in this one, she's like 11 years old. She ages through the book, so she doesn't stay that young for the whole book, but it follows her origin story, and you don't get a lot of her backstory. She's really this mystery, this mysterious character in Spellslinger, and she's very much a mentor character in Spellslinger. So I really like seeing her origins here and what made her forge her own path to becoming this kind of person. And we do encounter somebody in here that does help her shift that way, but she makes those choices herself based on past traumas and situations that she's been in. And I loved how this just encapsulated how emotional the Spellslinger books made me, but it didn't do that until at least 100 pages in. And so the beginning of this was quite slow to me. The pace was very slow, but to me it felt like you needed it to be in order to build up the scenario that Faru is in and to build up her mentality and her traumas and everything that she's been through. So it was necessary ground to cover, but it just wasn't as interesting to me as when she met a character named Durrell Brown, who is mentioned in the synopsis. But if you read the synopsis, you're going to start expecting this character to appear a lot sooner. And so I read that with that expectation of, a couple of chapters in, and that wasn't the case. So don't read the synopsis, just go in knowing that it's going to be mind-bending and magical, but not always in a good way. It's going to be logical, and it's going to test your mental faculties, because these books are always emotional, and the decisions that are made in here are so charged with character. They are amazing and beautiful. And I gave this a 4 stars. I wanted to give it a 5, but I loved how it ended, and I loved Faru's character development so far. I think it's beautiful, and I love how culture in here is represented through individuals and how they differently incite different mechanisms of their culture in a domineering way or just in a genuine way, and how they can be so blinded by things. Just the character weaving was amazing, and that is one of Sebastian de Castell's strengths, and it's what I love about his writing. His characters are always so deeply flawed or have experienced such trauma, but they always seem to find each other, and they always seem to choose love and friendship, even if that costs them. And it's the harder choice to make because it's the right choice to make. I really enjoyed the dynamic in here. To me, though, it did mirror a dynamic in Spellslinger. That just felt very lifted and then plopped in here, but that wasn't really a complaint, it was just something that I generally noticed, and I did enjoy this a lot, and I do want to continue because I thought this would be a standalone, but it's not. It's got Fall of the Argosy in the back, which is the next book in this series. I don't know if it's a duology or not, so I'm looking forward to whenever that comes out. I think it's at the end of this year because I really enjoyed reading about Faru and I can't wait to read more. And then lastly, I literally finished Ghost Story a couple of hours ago, so I can't tell you again the synopsis of this, which is making me sound like a broken record, but this Dresden book encaptured some tropes that I usually hate, but the way that it pulled them off made it believable, and I could kind of just make my grumbling really small and enjoy the story overall. The first part of it felt a bit tangential, and like Dresden was encountering and doing things that didn't overall in the bigger scheme of things make a lot of sense. But when ties started to appear and links started to appear, I was like, oh, okay, this ties to that book. It's not all in this book. So more sense came to it as I read through it. But when I was starting this, I kind of had itchy feet. Like, I want this to go somewhere faster and it's taking its time and I'm annoyed. But at the same time, Dresden is chaos and I love that. So I love this book and I gave it 5 stars. I thought I would give it a 4 or 4.5 stars based on the beginning, but when I look back on it, I can only say that it felt a bit tangential, but I still enjoyed the plot, the pace, and the characters. So I didn't really dislike it. I just noticed that it had a few moving parts and I was like, I want this to be faster. So it was as fast as it could be, and I quite enjoyed that about it. I loved the ending. There were so many parts that made me emotional. There were so many parts that made my jaw drop as well, and this is a series that has quickly become one of my favorites. This is the 13th book in the Dresden Files, if I hadn't made that clear already, and again, I gave it 5 stars and I loved it. So I only really read 7 things across March and April, which isn't a massive amount, but at the same time, I'm still proud of it because I managed to dig myself out of a reading slump, and I tend to get so busy that I just don't pick up books, and I pick up books on a weekend rather than a weekday. So I'm glad that I've got through all these audiobooks because I'm honestly struggling to find time to listen to them. So whenever I can make time to do that, I'm always enjoying them, and no doubt that made a difference with the Dresden Files, and that's why I've just suddenly decided to go on a kick and read as much of them as I can because I finished Changes in an entire day, and that was only on audiobook. So I just smashed that out and had the best time ever. So again, that is all I've read. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll chat to you down in the comments and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.